So here we are in Blender again. I just wanted to quickly show you how to save out your renders and a couple of passes as well. It's not as easy as it is in something like Octane, but nevertheless we can get some useful information out of it. So first of all, make sure you confirm the camera angle that you want to have, and you also checked here, that you have the resolution you want. Also check that you're using 16-bit color depth. That's going to be important for the z-depth parse to be smooth and not have these choppy gradients. So what you want to do then, if you're happy with it, you can press render here, render image, and your image will pop up, and it will take a short few seconds for the image to pop up. So here we are. You might notice that here and there it might look a tiny bit different than from the viewport, but nothing major here, I think. No major problems. So you go to image, save as, and you can save your image. You can also here under the passes tab, you can check on mist, for example, just the color, so you can see that there's actually a z-depth pass which you can get. So you can also save that out. Make sure you save this as 16-bit so you don't again get this choppiness in here. It's going to be smooth when you open it in Photoshop. So these are the two major things you can get from here. Also make sure that in this tab here you have mist selected, or all the passes that you actually want. In addition, we actually would love to get a material ID or some sort of clown pass out of it. So it's not as straightforward. There is support for cryptomat in cycles, but that's mostly for, I think, using the internal compositor. So it's not as easy to get that pass out. But there's a bit of a trick. It's not so straightforward, but we can, with a little bit of work, make it work. So here actually you have, in this shading option, you have a couple of options on how to look at the viewport. So what you can do is you can change the lighting to flat, get rid of the outline, and change the color to random. And then you actually get something like this. So that's pretty useful, but how do we get this out? Well, I haven't really found any other way, but you can, for example, T and N, get rid of these panels here, and then make sure you see the camera framing exactly, and then basically take a screenshot. Now that will work better with high density, high resolution displays. Like if you have a 4K or 5K display, then you're going to get pretty close to the resolution of your final rendered scene. I do understand that not everybody has that, but for now I'm not aware of any other way to get this image out of Blender. So I usually take a screenshot and then place it over the file in Photoshop as a new layer and make sure it aligns. And then I have somewhat of a matching clown pass to work with. So yeah, that's what I usually do. So I say you have some fun and take some cool shots out of this. As usual, I turn on Eevee in the viewport here and then play with the camera until I find a nice composition. So there's plenty of shots I took last time. Maybe I will revisit some of those to see what would work best for Paintover. So yeah, have some fun and then save out the files, and then we'll jump into Photoshop. So I wanted to show you guys how to set up the scene in Octane as well. Just to show you an alternative to Eevee, and also to show you some of the differences and the quality involved in using something like the Octane. So I'm using Octane standalone here. I exported my file from Blender as an FBX. You can also use OBJ if you want. So after opening Octane here, the first thing I want to do is drag and drop that FBX file into my Octane scene. So you can see here it has a couple of material slots which we can use. These are the same materials I defined in Blender, but of course for now we don't see anything. So we need to right click on this field here, which is your node interface, your node graph editor as it says here, and we need to set a render target, how it's called. So you can see when I click on this, when I activate it, you see this yellow box around here. We have settings here on the right, and here's the viewport. So I need to actually connect the geometry to this geometry, the output to the input here. And you said something happened. Now we need to actually just zoom out, really zoom out. And then you see we actually have our scene here. And you can see it kind of looks like it, which is good. So there's a couple of settings I want to adjust to make it look better. You see you get some render errors. This is due to the scale of the scene, which is I think a few kilometers. So we need to make some adjustments here. So here you have, when you click on this one, you get all the render target settings. If you click on this one here, the kernel, we can actually set a couple of kernel specific settings. So first of all, I want to switch from direct lighting to path tracing. I want to increase the array epsilon to get rid of these artifacts. So you see, once you slide it up, you hit a point where it just disappears. This is scale specific, so you just need to set it. I also want to set some of the quality related and sampling related settings, so my scene renders a bit faster. For the samples, 2000 is usually enough. I don't need super clean renders. Diffuse depth I leave, specular depth I set to 8. Oh, sorry. The GI clamp usually to something like 0.8 or 1. That will prevent fireflies from appearing for our emissions. For the sampling, I want to set path turn power and coherent ratio to 0.6. Some of these I found somewhere in terms of settings that is supposed to help speed up your scene, and I think for me it works. I set usually these 2 parallel samples and max tile samples to 8 as well. It flickers a bit, but it renders really fast. Other settings I want to set are the aspect ratio. I want this to be cinema scope. I can lock it and then I can fit it into my viewport. Other settings, I want to have a daylight environment for this one. So there's a night and day environment set now, so I can change the time. You can see how the shadows change. So it's like an evening now. It's like 7 p.m. And I can also control with the north offset. I can control the rotation of the sun, so the sun can come from a different angle, but it's still going to be that time of day. So I can really dial in exactly where I want my sun to come from. So you can create exactly the kind of shadows you want. Just play around with this a little bit. Nice to have like a shadow, like a light come out of here. It's pretty cool. But for now we don't need that. We also have here the medium, which can help us generate an environment fog. We'll get to that in a bit. But for now, I want to plug in all my textures and kind of rebuild them like I did in Eevee. So I will take a similar approach to what I've done in Eevee to show you that it's basically the same principle, just slightly different settings. So first I need a material. I'm going to use the universal material. I can choose to have an emission out of it, but I also get the same settings that I have like with the glossy. The glossy material does not have an emissions plug, only the diffuse has. So if I use the universal, I kind of get the best of both worlds. So I'll plug that into, let's say, buildings 1. We can build our own materials. We can also choose to take some from the library. So maybe for the water, I want to actually take something that is already pre-made, just to show you how that works. This live TV is you can connect it when you download Octane. Go to liquids. You can see you have a variety of choices, all sort of liquids. I want water. Let's choose this one. I can just drag and drop. It's called LiveDB. It's actually stored on a server, so it needs to be downloaded. So now we have a water. I want to adjust that a bit to get this nice blurriness of the water, the nice distorted reflections. Now it's a bit too clear. So we can double click on here to get the settings, to get the material itself. By standard, every material is using a UV map. If it will force it on it no matter what. So sometimes you get a lot of distortions. One way out of that is, of course, to use box projection again. So depending on the scale of the scene, we might have to adjust the scale of it. See what looks good. To find a good angle to judge the... So now we're getting a really kind of like a frosted glass effect. It's kind of what I want. So depending on how many GPUs you have, this is going to update faster or slower. Okay, so that is fine for now. I don't want to play around with it too much. So now we can go on to building our own material. The first one will take a bit longer, but the other materials are going to be just a copy of this one and with slight adjustments. So now that we have our material, we have all the usual slots like a diffuse, metallic, specular, roughness, bump, normal, and lots of other settings. So if you click on it, you can see everything that you can adjust here, which is quite a lot in the universal material. So let's choose some images here, basically the same as we have before. I'm not using anything different here. It's very basic. You plug in the, we move this so we can see, you plug in the texture. Now it's a bit messy because of course there's no UV map, so we need to again choose a projection box, plug that in. Most of these nodes will snap into the one that they're compatible with. So you see now we have a nice box projection. We can here uniformly scale it up or down. See, it's really big. It's really small. So something that makes kind of sense. We can also, like I did before in Eevee, go to textures and say color correction. Wire this up. And now I have a bit more control over the texture itself. I can make it darker, increase the contrast. So again, that gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of using that same image in multiple different ways. Choose a framing that kind of shows me overall how my scene looks. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to make it really dark or if it's going to make it brighter. We'll see about that. I want to definitely do something about the sun though. It's a bit too bright, that is for sure. So you can also change the power here, so it becomes quite dark. So you have many different ways of adjusting this. I also like to use the imager and the post-processing features. I have my own kind of settings that I like, which work well for the kind of look I'm after. So you can play with like usual like photography post-processing settings. To really go after the look you want. I always like to use the bloom to a certain extent. I set these so that these light flares are not too pronounced and are kind of blurred out. You can play around with your own settings here. So that one kind of works for me now. So I want to introduce some more textures here. See if I get the right one. I don't want to use too many different ones. So I'm using this texture for reflections, for metallicness, to just kind of get an additional layer of complexity on top of it. Let's see if I want to make this smaller or bigger. It's kind of okay. So I want to also take care of the emission. So I'm actually going to use the same. So I can just select these two, hold shift, and you can select them. I say copy paste, Control C, Control V, and plug it into the, where do we have the emission? Oh, sorry, of course, you need to first make a texture emission node here, and we can plug that in. So right now there's no texture plugged in, so it's just going to glow. Once you plug that in, it's going to take the black and white information as we're used to. Now it's time to again go into the color correction and adjust it so we get the right kind of emission that we want. It works pretty similar to Eevee, so by bumping up the gamma and the contrast, we can get exactly the kind of emission that we want. That's kind of cool. We can also, of course, go into the emission and play with the power. We can take surface brightness to get a bit of different look. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We can also, again, change hue saturation, right? So we can have this appear more greenish, reddish, pinkish. We can dial down the contrast. Excuse me, the saturation. So you can play around with it to get exactly the kind of look you want. There's more nodes. You can play around with it. But I think these are the main ones that we want to look at for this one. Seems to have a good rhythm. Maybe I want to play around with the color correction here as well a little bit. So you can do if it changes anything. A lot of it is playing around with the settings to really get something nice. What we can also do, if this distribution of lights is too orderly for you, or you feel like you're getting a lot of tiling in your textures, what we can do is there's something called the distribution node. So we can actually plug in a texture here. Use some kind of dirt texture and plug that in the distribution node. So now it's gonna kind of create like an overlay and will only show exactly where the white areas of the texture are, and it will show the emission there. So you kind of can break up your light patterns with that fairly easily. We can also use, again, a color correction node to play around with the sharpness of the edges here. It's quite soft because my texture has a very low resolution, has quite soft edges. So by, again, increasing the contrast, we can get harder edges here. So now we've broken that up a little bit. Let's see if we can get this maybe to read a bit better. So there's definitely something happening in here. There you go. Let's just add more complexity here. Okay, so now we kind of have this at a stage that I'm okay with. So we can draw a rectangle, move this over here, say copy paste. And now we can actually just see what is the next one. It's the roofs. Let's do the building number 2 first. So right now I plugged that in here and it has the same kind of structure now. But of course I want to have it look a bit different, so we can play with the hue a bit. Let me see where I can see it best. We can play with the scale of it. Get a different look. Maybe we want to bump up the emission. It's probably a bit too large. But you can see it's going to give us some variety. Something more bluish. Maybe it's a bit too big. Let me dial it down. So you see now we have some variety in here according to the selection of the materials we did. Let's dial down the saturation a bit. So you need to play around with the usual settings to get exactly the result you want, or something that's close enough to what you feel like is good. So for now that is fine. Cool. So now we can actually go on to see what else we have. We have the roofs, we have the lights, and we have the roads. So let's do quickly the rooftops. Oh, actually, let's do the lights first. So I can go again, copy paste this, plug it into the lights. So this one, of course, I want to be a lot brighter than the rest. So I can bump that up as well. Let me see where I can see the lights well. Oops. This one I think I want to have a bit bigger. I also want to maybe rotate it. I think it's this one here. Yeah. So I kind of want to have it similar to the one I had in Eevee. So I get somewhat of a similar look. You can see we are getting some quite nice reflections here in the water now. I'm not too worried about the color. I'm gonna, of course, put final touches on it in Photoshop. But for now, that seems to be quite okay. It's a bit too much of the dirt texture, maybe. Yeah, I want to get rid of that a bit. That's interesting. If I bump that up a bit more. Okay, so now we can move on to the rooftops. We have selected them. Let me see. Get close to one so we can see what I'm doing. Copy paste again. I don't actually want to have any emission come out of here, but I want it to be quite reflective. See what we can do with our settings. So let's see what we can do. I need to find a way to make this rather dark. So right now it's the opposite of what I want. Need to figure out why it's having this strong reflectiveness. This bright tone, I mean. Sometimes when you have too many settings, it might get confusing, so I'll set it like this. So you see something is happening. Let me kick this out. Let me make a new one. So we're getting some reflections now, that's great. That's kind of what I want. Let's see if it's overall makes sense. Probably want to have a bit more reflection. We see it's going quite well. Maybe brighten it up a little bit. So get a bit of contrast between maybe I want to have a bit of contrast between the top and the bottom. So for the purposes of this exercise, I think this is fine. I also have the roads, the light streaks that I need to plug in. Should be fairly easy. I'll just copy paste again, doesn't really matter. So the only thing we really need to do is that we need to change the orientation of this, and then we have to change the scaling, not uniformly, but we want to elongate these streaks here, maybe a little bit closer together, and then we need to bump up. We want to kind of make them reddish, and a bit stronger. See that we have these like roads going into the city again. Maybe we don't need this texture. I think that might be a bit better. Play around with the strength. I think this one will work well. So you see now we have kind of all our shaders set up the way we had before. And it was quite fast as well, since we kind of knew what we were doing. So all that's really left to do is we can play around with the environment a little bit, so we can see how fog will affect the scene. Having good fog settings is always fairly tricky. It's very dependent on the scale of the scene, but we'll see if we can manage to do something. What we can also do, now that we have this block ready, we can just copy that and have another block like that and manipulate it. So we can add, for example, a geometry group, have that one to be one of them, and then we can have a geometry placement where we have another one. Now we don't see anything because they occupy the same space. But now we can use these move tools here. Zoom out a bit, and then we can move this, and you see we have a duplicate. So if you feel like you want to expand your scene a bit, like this, and we can also rotate it, just have it a bit off angle. This, so we have just extended our skyline here. It's pretty cool. You can do it as many times as you want, if your graphic card can take it. So that's like a little bit of a geometry editor within Octane. Don't forget to save. We will save this under A. Okay, and then let's try to add, let's sort of play with the camera a little bit. Maybe we have 35mm camera. You can play around with this just like an Eevee. You can also have a 200. You can really zoom in and see what kind of really cool patterns you can find. You can see there's already really cool stuff happening. Abstract patterns. You can work on details. But for our purposes, we want to kind of do an establishing shot. So you want to get a lot of stuff in frame. See what kind of cool reflections are there. Reflections will always take a lot of time to compute. Let's see what we can do with the fog. So we need to go to our environment tab. And let's see, we need a medium here. That's the setting you want. Right now there's no node selected, but we want a scattering medium. So we don't see anything right now. There's a couple of things you need to use here to really dial in the desired result. So the density, of course, is way too high. See, if I go down, it appears again. Now we need to find a good mixture of the kind of colors your atmosphere is supposed to have. You can see that if it's dark, there's no fog. If we dial the fog color up, in this case the scattering color, then you can see how what kind of effect that has. If you have a really bright color, there's really going to be thick fog. But it's kind of the result is kind of like just this milky screen on top of our scene. That's not what we want. We want to have more like a distance-based fog. So we need to play around actually with the setting, which is the medium radius. We need to bump that up quite a bit. And then we need to really lower the density down. Depending on your scale of your scene, these values might vary. You see, we're getting something interesting here. So now you can play around with all these settings here to get exactly the kind of result you want. You can also play with the power of the environment, which will have an effect on the overall fog visibility. So you play around with these settings to find something that really suits you. I mean, if you want to have something really, really foggy, or if you just want to have a very slight fog, that is totally up to the project. You can do whatever looks good. You can also still play with, of course, all the other settings to get exactly the look you want. You can also have it completely dark. This one is pretty nice. So now we need to bump up some of the other values. It's very, very dark, but it's an interesting look. You can also, of course, adjust a lot of these things in Photoshop in the end. And in order to do that, we will need some render passes. You see, we get really nice silhouettes here. Let's see if we can get a nice sun position to highlight some of our water here. Really nice dusky feeling here. That's pretty cool. You can build out this entire environment if you want in 3D. But for our purposes here, I think we're good enough. Of course, the fog will work a lot better if you have strong foreground, background, and midground elements, so you can really see the distance-based fog. If you have a really long lens, like 200, you will not see much of this kind of fog. So you can try to find a really nice composition here, whatever you're happy with, and then you can play around with the kind of fog you want. And then in order to save it out, what we can do, let's get some really nice reflections here. What we can do is that we want to have a couple of passes. So you click on this one here, the render passes. And the ones I mainly use, and that varies from person to person, but the ones I find useful is the C depth, material ID, and also the reflection. So we'll look at what each of these does. Oh, for this scene, we actually want to also have the emitters. So we can see what each of these settings do. So the emitters, of course, it shows us everything that emits light. So we can separately control these in Photoshop and change the colors and everything. The reflection shows us just the reflection. So having this as an extra pass kind of allows us to play more with these reflective areas. Material ID shows you a different color for every material you have, so you can do quick selections and adjustments in Photoshop. And the Z depth pass shows us the depth. Right now there's a standard setting which might not be so useful, but you need to adjust these and you want to adjust it in a way that gives you a pretty good distribution from black to white, from the closest objects to the furthest away objects, so that you get a good distribution. Like this would be not so useful, this would be too much white, so you kind of want to have a pretty good gradient from front to back here. And that will depend on each shot, so you really need to go into the Z channel and change it according to the shot. And once you've done that, you can always click on here, save the current render to disk, you go through all the channels and save everything out. So in order to have final render resolution, I would usually bump this up to whatever you need, 4,000, 5,000, 8,000, whatever you feel like. You can save out as many different shots as you want. I'll be saving out 1 or 2 for me to paint over. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to do in Octane. It's pretty similar to, the principle is the same. I'm using the same kind of nodes to just work slightly differently here. You have to make different menu selections, but you can have pretty cool results with this one as well. So I'll play around with it a little bit longer, and I hope you have some fun as well. And then I'll see you back in Photoshop. So here we are now in Photoshop. As first step, I need to align my info, kind of the material ID info pass over my image, so I can use the selection tool to quickly mask the buildings and everything. It didn't match exactly based on the screenshots, so I need to do a little bit of aligning first to make sure that this all fits together. This little bit of work in the beginning will go a long way before and speed up my workflow later on. I'm actually going to do it the other way. So I'm going to overlay this over that, because I think the resolution is a bit different. Or not. So yeah, I'm just going to use very simply the transparency tool. The transparency, I'm going to decrease it so I can overlay it and see exactly how my images here overlap. I'm going to use the size of the frame because I know that they both have the same aspect ratio. So I'm going to try as much as possible to match these. It's a bit hard to see from the actual image where my overlay would fit, so I need to rely on the framing. But that's not a problem. I recommend you guys do that as well, so you have the frame in there and you just line it up, and then it should pretty much fit exactly. Of course, there's going to be a bit of softness from scaling, but that should be totally fine at this stage. Again, this works a bit better if you have actually a high resolution screen, a 4K or 5K monitor, as the screenshot will actually result in a higher resolution image. Otherwise, you might have to resort to like taking a screenshot of different parts of the image and tiling them together. I have some of the markers still in the frame. You can disable those in Blender directly, so they don't pop up, or you can just paint them out quickly in Photoshop. So I'm using usually the clone stamp tool to exactly get the right color. You can also use the paintbrush, doesn't matter. So now we have that aligned. So that allows us now to use all these selections to quickly mask the buildings and add atmosphere before and in front, and only work with the affected areas. I'm using the selection 1 tool here. You can check or uncheck the contiguous mode, so that when you click on a certain color, you can select all the colors in the entire image and not only that particular piece. So in the beginning, I want to kind of establish the mood and want to see what I can get with my selection tools. And I'm using the gradient tool to add a bit of atmosphere in between the buildings, so I can separate them out, because there's actually not that much information in the actual render. So I wouldn't be able to do that. Just purely based on the render very accurately or very cleanly. And also because there's not really a Z depth pass. There is one, but it doesn't have that much information, since I'm quite far away from the city, and the buildings are all quite packed together. I want to add a bit of darkening to the corners, a bit of vignetting to focus really focus the eye on the middle of the screen. The way I usually apply fog is either by using the gradient tool and then using the layer mode on either normal or screen. So I'm seeing like I want to have a bit of like the blue from the sky coming in, so I'm choosing like a dark bluish tone to add a tiny bit of background where the selection allows me to. I'm just going to do it a couple of times, and also maybe a bit of glare from above. Maybe it's not completely dark, but I want to make sure that I use these tools very subtly. I don't want to have any gradients that are too harsh to destroy my overall feeling. So now around at the bottom of the at the bottom of the buildings, basically, not at the bottom of the image, I want to add a bit of glow, since a lot of city streets, a lot of buildings, a lot of life will be down there, so there should be more glow down there. So again, these first steps are just there to kind of get a feeling for the mood, trying to see what other selections I can make. Maybe I want to just try to select a certain amount of buildings. You can also play around with the sensitivity of it, to make sure that only certain colors are being affected in the selection tool. Again, another screen layer. See what that does. Again, trying to be very subtle. I usually use the quantity around 20%, 30%, or even 10% to add the effect very subtly. If I need a stronger effect, then I just do it multiple times. I pick and choose the colors from the windows and from the general colors of the image itself to make sure that it kind of fits together. Let's see, repeat that a few more times to really get a good layering going. That I get a bit of distance in between the buildings. And I don't want to have necessarily sharp distinctions between the buildings at all areas. I want to have a good mix, a good variety, a good rhythm of sharp edges that I can clearly make out to a bit blurry edges that are kind of blending into the background. That will give me a nice rhythm, a nice variety of things for the viewer to look at. If everything is too even, it's going to look very boring. So now that's like a personal thing that I do is a post-processing. So I use a couple of filters. I think these filters are often used for to load in custom LUTs or used for photography. So I'm building my own kind of like stack of a variety of LUTs that I use for color correction, for color grading. I usually add quite a few, maybe 3 or 4 of these to get the desired effect. I've played around with these a lot, so it's just suited to my taste, whether I wanted to have it more warm or more cooling, whether I wanted to have increase or decrease the contrast. I use these, and it kind of blends the whole image together. It lets the colors and everything feel more blended together. You can play around with these and figure out your own layer stack, or you can follow mine. I usually use these in a not at 100%, but maybe at 20 or 30%. And I will fine tune these later on, but I wanted just to get like a bit of a feeling going for what I'm going to go for in the end, just so I can always have that on top. So now I'm just, I actually selected the bottom, and I want to give the image a bit of depth. So that's why I'm trying to kind of fake a bit of perspective lines going towards the city. Again, I want to do that very subtly. I don't want to have it too overbearing, because I still really like the reflections that I have in the water in front. So I'm lowering the opacity, change the blending mode to screen, kind of use the soft round brush to get rid of a part of it. So you can see I've subtly added some lines that are kind of guiding our eye towards the city. And I noticed I haven't actually got rid of that marker from Blender. So I quickly want to get rid of that with the stamp tool. I usually use the stamp tool with, again, a round, soft brush. In this case, I'm just actually going to pick an area and erase part of it. The clone stamp tool is really one of my most often used ones. The problem with using a lot of 3D and pushing 3D quite a bit further is that it's getting more obvious when you actually use a paintbrush and paint into it. So oftentimes I end up using the clone stamp tool kind of as a paintbrush to make sure that the areas that I'm adding, that I'm replacing, that I'm fixing have the same kind of quality as the render itself. So it's not going to be as obvious when I try to add or change or paint in things. So now I kind of have my scene rudimentarily set up, and I want to bring in some of my reference images. As you see, I don't actually paint much. Again, the reason also being that we're striving for photoreal or more photoreal finish. We're striving for, like, yeah, it could be a frame out of a movie. So I'm going to use a lot of the photos directly into the image and try to blend them together as well as possible. And on the other hand, yeah, like it's hard to actually paint into it and then maintain that look and not have it a mix of like 3D elements and brush strokes. If you wanna make it very painterly, I think you will have to paint over most of the image and not leave that much 3D actually there for it to be a homogeneous looking image. So I'm going to use a few photos for textures, for atmosphere, for lights and everything to improve the image. And I'm going to use some layer blending techniques that I guess have their origin somewhat in matte painting. But of course, I don't need to take care of all the values and the colors to that degree that we do in matte painting. But rather, I'm using it for the purpose of making this image look better. So right now I actually made a little mistake. What you need to do is that you need to make sure that the resolution of the image is at I usually use 300 dpi, and that kind of results in the images that we bring in to be scaled larger. Whereas if the image is at 72 dpi, the images tend to be very, very small when you drag them in, like I just did from Adobe Bridge or from whatever you use, Explorer, Finder. So it's just a bit of a, I guess it has to do with how big the image really is, that you download it from, I don't know, royalty-free stock site, or that you purchased from a photo reference page. So I can recommend that you download and buy a lot of the image packs that are now cheaply available. The quality and the variety of those is so good right now. And you don't have to be worried about using the images. You don't have to worry about the copyright and that kind of stuff anymore. Versus when you download images from Google, then you always have to make sure that you really can't really tell anymore what's going on, that you don't use the image too directly. So I'm trying to bring a bit more variety down into the water reflection, into the water, to emphasize that feeling of going towards the city. Again, I'm bringing the image in. I'm, in this case, want to use it very subtly. I get rid of it a lot with the round brush. The process I do with these images is actually always the same. So let's have a look at this one, trying to see where I can put in some of that smoke. Maybe I want to have like a certain area in the city be more industrial and have, like, I don't know, a lot of chimneys and stuff, and smoke come out of it. So I'll do that for the bottom left area. Usually when I want to have the brighter parts of an image, I choose the screen mode. You can also use lighten. So now you can see I'm darkening down the darker parts of the image even more to only be left with the brighter parts of the image. I'm doing a color balance adjustment to match it more closely to the image itself. And this one I use a lot, the layer blending. The top and bottom kind of control the actual image. The top and the lower bar will control whatever is behind that image in the layer stack, or to the bottom of it. And by blending this together, you can control how much of the image is actually shown and how much of the image below is supposed to blend through. I'm going to be doing that a couple of more times, so you will see in depth how it affects the layer blending. So these cloud images are very useful. I'll get to those in a moment. Here I want to add some of the lights. So it's going to be very useful. Again, I'm using screen mode. I'm going to adjust the levels by having the dark parts be even darker and therefore disappear. So I'm only really left with the lights and a bit of fog there. I kind of want to keep to the all over scale of the image and really only have a few lights here and there. So now I can use the clone stamp tool again to quickly populate and paint a few more of these lights in the other areas. So that's going to be like my kind of like the lower areas of the city. So now kind of what I wanted to do with these is that I wanted to be that the buildings are so big, so tall that the clouds are already between the buildings. So now I need to make a bit of a, as you can see, the white parts were quite blown out based on the post-processing I did. So I need to lower down the bright parts a bit to have the clouds appear well balanced. And now I want to have the clouds actually be behind some of the buildings, but not all of them. So I'm going to select a few buildings that I want to stand in front of the clouds so that it really gets the idea that the buildings are reaching in between the clouds, and it gives me another element to actually add depth to my image. So I'm using the clouds kind of like as a way to make the image clearer, to make it appear more more deep, like in Z depth. So now I actually, with the selection, if you click the mask tool, you can create an instant like layer mask, and then I disconnected by pressing the button in the middle between the mask and the layer. So I can move the content of the image of that layer without moving the mask itself. So now I need to, now I'd like to switch to a black and white mode. You can do that with a hue saturation adjustment layer, setting the saturation to 0. So I can accurately judge the values of my image and matching those photos to the photo layers that I bring into the overall image. And it just helps me to see the layer, the values more accurately, because all those colors usually get in the way, and especially the color red makes it very hard for the human eye to judge accurately what's going on with all the values. So I want to bring in, I can turn on and off that overlay, that black and white overlay layer, to really make sure that I'm adjusting the clouds in the right way. So now the issue here is that these clouds were taken in daylight. They were quite bluish, and the sun gives them the kind of shape they have. Not the shape, sorry, the kind of values they have, and have them appear the way they do. But for us, it's going to be a bit different, since the clouds are at night, so there's no sun, and the moon will probably be not strong enough to light it up. And they're going to get their main illumination from the buildings, from the light pollution from the buildings. So I kind of have to take a quick look and see if I have any reference photos of what that could potentially look like. what kind of values these clouds would have being lit up more artificially, so that we're gonna arrive at a good blending for these clouds. So first I'll make them a bit bigger. Or not. So the clouds are kind of still brighter than a lot of the buildings. But I have to kind of take the harsh highlights out of it. And then probably have to paint a lot over it to simulate the light illuminating those clouds. So this takes a bit of adjusting. My go-to tool is always levels. I think you can also use curves or anything you want. It's just kind of out of habit. I always use that. So now after I adjusted the values, I am adjusting the colors. That's always the way to work, I think, to first really get the values right, and then you can adjust the colors. That makes sure that you end up with a proper integration of these photo plates. So now I can still adjust the mask. I can select the mask and paint into it, or use the selection tool or anything to make, in case I have made a bad choice before. So I don't actually have to destroy the actual cloud layer. I can just paint onto the mask and get rid of some parts or add other ones. I like to work for this kind of stuff. I like to work non-destructively. Again, I like to make very subtle changes. So I'm using the gradient tool to add a bit of the light bleeding into the clouds. So I can control really where I want to have the clouds block the lights behind and where I want them to let a bit of the light through. Again, I'm using the soft brush tool. I'm affecting the mask itself. I can also use the clone stamp tool to copy certain parts of the clouds into other areas. But now I'd like to, I'd always would recommend to adjust the photo layers to really have them match more the plate the image you're making, instead of just leaving the photos kind of in there. The photo you bring in, it always should only be the base of it, and then you need to paint over it. So now I'm using the clone stamp tool, trying to think where I want to add additional areas of interest. It can't be that every part of the image is interesting. It should be that you have a few areas that you take care of more, that you want to direct the viewer's eye to, versus other areas where that are kind of displaying like a supportive function, that help to make the image sit well together, but that are not as important as the rest. Especially towards the edges of the image, I don't want to have anything to stand out too much, because I want to direct the focus onto the middle of the image, onto the important points that whatever that is supposed to be in your image. So now I'm actually adding a color dodge layer. Unchecking those two checkboxes is going to be very important. And now I'm using the gradient tool again picking the colors from the lights, because I want to have some of these lights bleeding through and illuminating the clouds, like I said before, and to have a bit of light bleed in certain areas. So you can really feel like these lights are really strong. They are infecting the entire atmosphere around it. And having that light bleed everywhere is going to be it's going to be very interesting. So let's see if we can add a few more clouds, maybe in front of the entire maybe in front of all buildings. Let's see if that would look good. Getting rid of the parts with a soft brush that I don't need. So actually flipping this image on its head is quite good, since the illumination comes from the buildings below. It looks maybe a bit too much like storm clouds, so that can be okay if you want that kind of feeling, right? So if there's a strong sense of foreboding, if it's in the client brief that it's supposed to be like a stormy night, that kind of thing, that can be cool. I'm copying my mask just by alt dragging the mask onto the new image. So I'm hovering my mouse over the other mask and then alt dragging it onto the new image, onto the new layer. So I'm doing this adjustment again, and by holding alt and pressing on this little arrow, you can actually split it up and make a more smooth transition between the values. So when you do stuff for like clouds and that kind of stuff, it's very useful because it gives you like a smoother blending. Using the clone stamp tool again. Using the gradient tool to get rid of some of the detail. I don't want the detail to be even everywhere. And that's what I talked about before. I want to have some of the buildings blend into the background to get a good rhythm of hard and soft edges. So now we can add some of the finer details. Again, these images are purchased from certain websites that I'm sure everybody knows. And those high resolution images really well made high resolution images can save you a ton of time when you need to do these kind of images. The same way that the clouds were purchased and some of them are already masked. So again, that saves you so much time. Just imagine you would have to cut out all those clouds and waste a lot of time doing that again and again. It's really a bad way to spend your time. So now I'm copy pasting these images to really populate my entire width of the image. Getting rid of some parts to make sure it doesn't look repetitive or copied. Getting rid of the parts that I don't need with the soft round brush. The reflection in the ground I usually fake with like a bit of blurriness, Gaussian blur, and then a motion blur that goes vertical. So I can kind of simulate the blurriness in the water. So that Those images add a nice bit of like additional layer of details, smaller buildings. Actually, through the atmosphere that is already in the image, in the photograph itself, it adds also a bit of distance between all those buildings, between the small ones and the bigger ones. I also sometimes take only particular pieces out of an image. So if I want to have a nice different facade from the rest, I can copy those parts over and put them in certain locations. Again, I'm choosing screen mode, making it darker so that it really only shows the bright parts, and I don't have to bother about painting out all those dark parts. So now I can place these pieces wherever I feel like they would fit. Trying to, again, the point is to create rhythm, to create variety in terms of the kind of lights there are, the density of lights. Some areas should be darker, some areas should be brighter. The thing is, the thing I want to avoid is that everything is evenly lit. Everything has an even amount of lights and everything. I want to avoid that. Right now I just try to, maybe if I want to add like a little mountain range in the back, but I don't think it's going to look very good. Or maybe it's okay, but that's kind of not the feel I wanted to go to. I wanted to go after. I want to have like a really massive cityscape, and I want to focus on that. Maybe the adding like mountain is like a task for a different image. So I'm adding these little lights to simulate that there's going to be a few different buildings. See where this could fit. Stretching it, so adjusting the perspective so it kind of fits in there. Maybe it's a bit too harsh, so I want to get rid of part of it. Another stab to that mountain range thing, but I think it's not gonna, maybe very subtly in the top, but I think I'll give it another minute or so. Maybe it would look too similar to like a future version of Hong Kong then, if it already doesn't. Yeah, it's okay, but I'm not too crazy about it. Always turning the layer on and off to see if it really improves anything. Always like adding some spotlights, kind of like, yeah, massive spotlights, to see if we can add anything a bit different to the image, to some area, making it, it's like a small accent. Maybe there's like, I don't know, there's like a helicopter, spaceship flying through. Kind of adds to just giving the viewer something to look at, something to discover, something for their mind to imagine, a certain thing that's happening in the city. Maybe it needs to be over in the more industrial area. Playing with the angle, trying to tone it down, not having it to be too overwhelming. I still need to do something with the water. I'm still not quite happy with how that looks. I'm selecting only that part. Maybe I can get a nice pattern going with that. Again, same steps. But it's not really working, so let me see what else I can do with it. So I'm splitting up these things again with the Alt key, right? And so I can achieve a very subtle blending of colors. It's actually quite interesting to take the inverse almost. So the top layer controls my current layer. The top slider controls the current layer, so I can tell it to not show any of the light areas at all and just leave me with kind of like in between some of the darker ones, which kind of gives me now like the inverse of what the original photo was about. I mean, whatever that is, it I think does its job. It's a subtle indicator of a bit of perspective going towards the city. Since it's water-ish stuff, I don't know, oil slick or whatever, I kind of want to make it a bit blurry. So I don't want to really call any massive attention to it. It's just a subtle nod. Checking my other layers if those are still working or if they're a bit too dominant. See if any of the other images are helpful. Don't forget to save. So I kind of like this image. It has a bit of like fogginess on the bottom and some little lights here and there. See if you can do anything with that. You see, I have a few brushes, but I don't really use any of them. I'm just using the soft round brush for pretty much the entirety of this video, and often I also just use the soft brush. Even in the clone stamp tool, I just use the soft round brush as the stamp. This little thing here just gives me like a little bit of a separation, a bit of fake atmosphere between buildings, just to give a bit more variety, to give an indication of some smaller buildings here and there. And with the clone stamp tool, I'm copying that a couple of times. Maybe flip it so it doesn't look too obvious, or flip it on its head, so that kind of gives us a chance to like fake some overhangs, or yeah, it gives us a different kind of look to it, which is actually pretty cool. Maybe we can add like a little brighter area that's a bit bigger there. Just stretched it. Again, just trying out different things, making sure nothing looks like it's repeated, giving a different quality to that light, not so harsh, a bit more blurry. Again, it's about rhythm, it's about variety, it's about not doing the same thing all over. Like even though we use the same texture in Blender everywhere, we want to get that variety going. So that's it for the first image. Let's take a look at the second one. Here we are at the last image. I've prepared it already, so I brought in all the render passes from Octane and layered them quickly. Here in Octane, it's a bit easier to do all that stuff. So you can see I got a material ID pass, Z depth, reflection pass, an emissive pass, all separated out so we can have the maximum flexibility to work with this image. That's a reflection pass. So I cut out quickly the background with the material ID. You can see the Z depth. I almost want to take the reflection pass as a base and then layer the other stuff on top. For the Z depth, I usually take a soft light and adjust the values a bit so I get a proper image out of it, so the blacks are not disappearing and the lights don't blow out. So always checking how that works. I'm doing using the layer clipping by pressing Alt, and that makes the layer on top only affect where there's something on the layer below. So for the emissive, I'm using a screen layer mode again and lowering the opacity a bit. So now I'm actually using the render itself to see what happens if I layer that on top in a lower opacity. Always trying to be very subtle with these changes and not always using 100%. So I have a different lighting scenario which I actually rendered out. I wanted to see if that does anything. I couldn't really decide at that time in Blender which one I want to use. So I'm going to just play around with it and see basically which image gives me better readability overall. Playing around with the layer modes, see what could work best, if it's light or screen or something else. So you can see I can take this image. I can actually choose to do like even like a daylight Paintover or like a nighttime Paintover. So actually the image out of Octane gives me a lot of flexibility. I can push it quite a bit. I think more so than I can with the Eevee image. And of course, having all those passes readily available makes it a bit easier, I have to say. So I'm just trying to play around with everything to see what gives me the best mix of things. And now I can start bringing in some images again like I did last time. So I guess a lot of the workflow is going to be very similar. It's following the same kind of steps. But maybe the previous one was, I mean, had a bit of different feeling to it, and maybe it was a bit simpler since it's kind of was like a one point perspective shot, dead on, with very straight lines. So maybe that made things a bit easier, and it made it a bit easier to just like drop in some images without having to do too many adjustments. So I wanted to do another image, which might seem a bit more complex at first glance. But I hope you will see that it's really not that much difference after all. So I have a couple of, I wanted to start by getting rid of the background and kind of fully extending that image into the back, all the way into the horizon. I haven't really decided which image I'm going to use, so I'm going to try 2 or 3 different ones to see how that fits. So I think they could look quite nice, and they kind of fit the best into the whole perspective. So now I need to make a few adjustments because there is a bit of a 3-point, actually quite a bit of a 3-point perspective going on here. So I need to make sure that in terms of perspective it kind of fits into it. So now all these selection layers and everything will come in really handy to really quickly mask exactly and erase exactly where I want this stuff to fit. So without those, without that material pass, it's impossible to do this accurately and fast. Probably should have used a layer mask instead, so I could move this around a bit more. But that's okay for now. Trying to figure out a way again, how can I blend the foreground and the background in the best possible way. Okay, so maybe let's try a different image. Maybe that wasn't the one that fits best. I do like to see a bit of the... I wonder if it's going to be nice to see some of the ocean in the background. Or the lake or sea or whatever. You have to kind of keep note on where the horizon is accurately, otherwise it will look off. And of course the perspective lines overall. Let's see if that will work. You can see the perspective is a bit off. Now I'm actually using a layer mask. At least I learned from my mistakes the first time. So now I can adjust the image without destroying it and can make changes to the perspective and everything. I think this one might fit a bit better, or maybe I'll use a mixture of both. We'll see. I actually brought in the exact same post-processing layer stack from the other image. I haven't activated it yet, and I might want to make a few changes, but so in case you're wondering what's in there, since I just turned it on and off. I usually do that to save time. So now I'm trying to find a better blending point between the rendered image and the photograph. Adding like an atmosphere haze layer. I leave it on normal and use the gradient tool again to bring that in a bit better. I haven't really decided yet how much water is there going to be, or is it going to be all full of, I don't know, other stuff, buildings. Whatever's going to look best. I'm not too married to the idea that there needs to be like, it doesn't need to be like a waterfront kind of city kind of thing like in the other one. I don't necessarily will create like something that looks exactly the same or fits in the same mold as the other one. To kind of show the point that, I mean, even though it's the same kind of render or the same kind of geometry, that it can still go any which way. I'm just trying to see what kind of blending I can achieve between, again, the foreground and the background. See if you can, yeah, maybe have a mix of this one and the other one. Trying to take the color out a bit, since it was looking a bit too saturated. Actually, this one doesn't look too bad. I kind of like to see that there's like lights in the distance. There's more of a city in the background. The other one looks a bit more empty. So I think it looks more interesting if the city is bigger. See if you can blend that somehow, or whatever looks better. So So you see a fair amount of stuff is not set in stone. We need to still experiment a fair bit to see whatever will give us the best result. Adding a bit more atmosphere, a bit more readability in the end, a bit thicker fog. Can't go wrong with fog. So now you see I enabled the post-processing layer stack, and it gives me an image that's a lot more reddish. While I do bring in all this stuff as a setup from a different image, I still want to make sure that it kind of fits the image, this particular image. There's no one size fits all approach, right? So I do like that the image is getting warmed up a bit instead of just being too bluish, but I want to see what kind of look I can create with that. Do I want it to be predominantly dark, or do I want to push the lightness a bit? You can see that it becomes quite bright. So playing with a levels adjustment here. See whatever gives me the best look. Turn it off, turn it on, see if it actually improves the image. So now, just like in the other image, I'm gonna try to choose some selections to make my life easier and to add some fog in between. Now you see that because this is based on the materials in this image, and I only really have two materials for the buildings, it's actually makes it a bit tricky to find a quick way to select everything. In that sense, the random color assignment in Eevee is actually not a bad idea. It's actually quite useful because I can really select every building by itself. So now we go back and find some nice images to put into our illustration. I'm choosing a similar set of images, the same kind of atmosphere, the same kind of clouds that I used before. And pretty much I'm doing a similar kind of adjustment for it. So this is a nice, like, above the clouds kind of image, or in between the clouds, which I think which is kind of right where we are in terms of point of view. It was taken from an airplane, of course, but since we want to give the illusion of being really high up as well, looking down on the clouds, I think this image will really serve us well. Of course, I had a bit of an idea in the beginning when I chose this reference image that I might be able to do something like that, and that it would be a cool way to look at a city like that. I guess it comes down to you really have to have a bit of an idea of what you have in your library, and kind of a bit of foresight on what you can use and what would be a cool image. So here I'm using the same kind of layer blending modes, the same kind of blending of values below and on the layer itself to get rid of the darker areas of the image and just leave the white clouds for me to see. Trying to play with the masking, even though it doesn't quite work, since I also used the same material on the buildings on the ground. So it'll be easier if I just choose the isolated buildings there. So I think that's kind of going in the direction. I disable the link between the mask and the image itself and kind of paint over with a soft brush exactly where I want to have my clouds in the image. That's not really going to work, I guess. I don't want to obscure too much. I just want to have the clouds to be a subtle accent to the overall image. Always make sure to be on the right layer when you select stuff. Now I want to make sure that the clouds sit in the image properly. So now, because I did tell the image to the layer to cut off at a certain point when the values become too dark, of course when I do a value adjustment, that will not affect where to blend it. So I need to go back into the layer options to make sure that the right part of the image is still visible. Doing some color adjustment. I wanted to subtly have maybe some of the brighter parts, like the water, shine through certain areas. So I can do that also with a layer blending adjustment. So let's bring in that big cloud again, do some value adjustment so it looks properly. Value and color adjustment. It's a bit easier since we're like in a kind of very bluish range of tones here. Same step, selections and layer masking to have that cloud only appear in certain areas. Again, the point of all of this is, again, to find a nice mix of obscuring and revealing certain parts of the image. So now I actually want to see if I can do a little trick. I want to kind of get a bit more control in the selection in the material ID pass. So I'm actually creating like a hybrid between the Z depth and the material ID by using like a blending mode and then copying that result into a new layer. So which would give me like here a few more tones to work with. If I set my selection 1 tool fine enough, I can actually select some of the items in the foreground and background, so you can see that in the foreground it has like a darker yellow as in the background. Just playing around with it to see if I can get a better color variety to play around with it. Just to give me more options to use the selection tool more easily. So now I merge that down and copy it into a new layer. You have to press Alt Control E for that. You can see I can select this part in front now more easily. See what we can do here. So I'm just looking to get the best read out of the shapes and see exactly what's in front, what's in the back. Trying to find where that area is that makes this a bit lighter. Probably a good habit to name your layers, but I don't know, I somehow never get around to do that. So here you can see I'm adjusting the tolerance level of the magic wand to get more granularity, to get a finer granularity of my selection. Trying to create layer after layer of atmosphere to really push the stuff in the midground, background further away. So sometimes the selection will just not be perfect, or certain areas with the same kind of texture overlap. So you just need to go in and use the lasso tool a little bit to help you out here. So I want to have that building in front really be separated a bit from the rest. Since right now you can't really tell, the values are too similar, but of course we know there's some space in between, so I need to emphasize that. So I'll copy that cloud layer and bring it in between here. Of course I forgot a part of the image. I have to zoom in to make sure it's somewhat clean. I can add that to my mask, and now I have the entire building cut out. Let's see if we can fit this cloud in there. So it's going through the process again and again. There's really nothing different at all about any of these steps now that are going forward. It's only really about making design choices, putting the clouds in the right spot, revealing and obscuring the right, not the right, but the best possible views on the city. I kind of think I want to have some of the lights bleeding through the clouds here and there. Have some of the warmer lights come through and illuminate the clouds from below or from the left or from areas we can't actually see. So I guess one thing to think about is that if you want to create a believable image, you have to make sure that people understand that there's stuff on the outside of the frame, right? There's things that you do not see, but that nevertheless can have an influence on what's going on in your image, so that you have light bleeding from behind a building, you have a cloud going to the back of one building and coming out the other, that kind of visually connect. There's light coming from outside of the frame that is influencing, like, for example, the clouds that you do see in the frame, and all these kind of things that create the illusion that you're creating an entire world, you're creating an entire city, and you do not only create a one-off illustration. Again, I'm using the same kind of color dodge settings and layer to create a few blooming effects around certain stronger light sources. So here you see I'm adding something that would indicate that there's maybe a heavily illuminated building obscured just to the left of our foreground building. You can see I'm experimenting with illuminating certain areas over other ones to see if you can create some nice rhythm, some nice highlights, focal points, in addition to what we already have on screen. Here we are adding little lights to the city, because we do still lack that lower level of buildings, that lower level of illumination that exists in the city to indicate that, hey, there's low-lying buildings, there's a different part of the city that is not as organized or as structured as some of the bigger buildings are, and the windows on them. So that creates a nice little breakup from the very straight, very office building looking structures that we have currently, to create few more random lights, maybe some smokestacks, again like we did in the other building, indicating that there's a different part of the city which will help us to create a more believable environment, because not every city is everywhere exactly the same. The city does not only consist of like a central business district. It's not only all skyscrapers, right? A city, I mean, in most cases always looks like it's there's one district, there's another district. Not everything is, one is residential, one is industrial, one has more infrastructure, the other one has more high-rise buildings. So we want to echo a little bit of that. We want to create a little bit of that variety as well. We do not have to do everything in one frame, but it would be nice to show a little bit of a natural city, even though it's so much bigger. It's massively huge what we're building here. We need to feed off a familiar city image that we know from our everyday experience. Trying to clean up my layers a little bit, see, do I really need these layers I have never activated? Decide to get rid of all of them. Okay, time to get in some more stuff. I think I need to do something about the ground. I need to bring in some structures on the ground that are a bit more interesting. Maybe I need to bring in some highlights. I need to bring in some smaller details, an indication of what they could be. Also maybe some textures for the walls to kind of break up the repeating patterns of the windows that I have on my skyscrapers right now, to add a little bit something in between to break up the patterns, to introduce a variety of materials, because not every building again is made out of the same building. Some have more glass, some have more steel, some have more windows, less windows. So I drag them all in, I go through it one by one. So there's a few cool things about this image. It was taken from inside of a building, of course, looking out over the other buildings, and it has some reflections in there, so I want to actually play with that. Trying to adjust my post-processing stack a bit more, trying to get a better look for the image. I wasn't quite happy with the one before, so now I can go back in and finesse that a bit more. It's probably going to look a lot closer to the final image that you've probably already seen. Make some small adjustments to get rid of some of the color that looked a bit wrong. So let's see what we can do with these. If I feel like I can use the image for multiple purposes, I'm actually making a quick copy before I make any adjustments. So let's see, this is actually a pretty cool image because it kind of gives me like an indication of more life. The city was okay, but it felt kind of a bit dead. So it's good to give an indication of, hey, there's actually people living, there's things going on, without actually showing what's going on, right? But if you add a lot of light, then you can kind of fake it. So this actually looks pretty cool. And these lights, these reflections in the window actually, I mean, I think it's some kind of lamp in the interior. Maybe it was a restaurant or something, but now it feels like it's like some kind of massive illuminated structure in the distance, which is pretty cool. Add a bit of vignetting. I always like to do that. It's a photographic thing, nothing you need to really do. I wonder if I should add a bit of like, atmosphere, like bleeding into the image that maybe comes from the sky, and that gives, I like to sometimes do that to give it like a different tint, like to add a bit of variety in the color. I just do a screen layer with a very low opacity gradient again. Kind of looks cool, so let's see if we want to stick with that later on. Maybe I can introduce this also as some kind of building material, since that's really what it is on the image itself. Try to adjust the perspective to fit it exactly in there. Those lines really need to match the perspective lines that you have on the building. Otherwise it will look really bad. See if this works. It might not, but it's worth a shot since it just takes a few seconds. Again, we adjust the levels, we adjust add our black and white layer to make sure that it fits. See if we can add some of the structure below bleeding through to blend it better. Change the color so it really blends into the building, into the image overall. So let's see if we can find a different use for that image. We're dragging and dropping our mask from the other layer, so we don't have to redo the mask again. We can just drag and drop it, like I said before. Skewing it into perspective and see if we can add an indication of more stuff going on over there on the left. Of course, the perspective is totally off, but we might only be using certain parts of the image. Just to offer a glimpse into what could be there. That's pretty okay. We'll go through the other images. That's pretty cool. The kind of idea of a highway going between the buildings in a city, maybe we can add some indication of that down there in between our buildings to really emphasize what kind of scale we're dealing with here. Because at this level it becomes pretty abstract, almost. The windows are really tiny, and maybe it's getting harder for us to understand how really massive that is. And we need to use everything available to us, every idea available to us to emphasize that that hey, this is massive, right? So we can use the windows, we can use the atmosphere, and any kind of other familiar details to push that idea. So we'll probably erase most of this and try to see what kind of little highlights we can put in there to indicate that there's some kind of highway going through. We need to adjust the perspective a little bit in thinking about how big or small we want to scale this. Kind of revealing it only a little bit so the cloud covers most of it. Just a subtle nod down there. See what else we have. Maybe it could be interesting to add a little bit of reflectivity onto the otherwise very very drab looking concrete surfaces, just to break up things a little bit. See if that will be possible. Try to squeeze it in there in the perspective. It's quite off, but we'll see if with our screen layer we can do anything quickly. I really just want to have a hint of it, a glimpse of maybe the lights in the back reflecting off it, since we don't really have a sun in this shot. Or maybe I can even indicate it here on the side, flipping it around. Trying to actually get rid of most of it, just revealing it here and there where the light actually would hit it, and otherwise being completely obscured. I still don't know if that's a good idea, but seems to be okay. It kind of has a bit of a reflection going on, but you can't quite make out what that reflection is. Trying to really fit it into the perspective here, getting rid of parts I don't need. Again, turning on and off, see if it actually improves the image. Really minute adjustments here. Using a brush with a lower opacity to get rid of most of it, but I don't want to have it be too distracting since it's so far at the edge of the frame. This one might be interesting though, I think, if it catches the light somewhere. Give a different quality of surface to that particular area. Not sure that will really be of any use since it's such a big surface. And it kind of works against the maybe almost like dystopian feel I'm establishing here. So kind of makes it look too happy, too bright. And I decided to get rid of it. Well, that's also how it goes often. It's a bit of like surfacing. Maybe you can bring that in somewhere. Again, using the same layer mask, bring it in. And for these kind of texturing work, I often use the soft light layer. And then adjusting the levels again to really have it sit in there really subtly. Since there's going to be a lot of atmosphere in between, I want to cap the brightest and the darkest point as to reduce the contrast. Going back in distance, we have to reduce the contrast quite a bit for it to successfully sit in there and match the values of the image we have here. Yeah, I want to have it again. Subtlety is again the word here. I don't want to have it to be too much of an eye-catching thing. It's just kind of like in there. It's like, okay, I understand that that's that kind of material. There is something there, but it doesn't really matter exactly like what it exactly is. Probably a bit too run down, doesn't really match. This is a pretty interesting structure. It's an airport, but I'm more interested in not adding like an airport in there, but I like the rhythm of like light and dark, the kind of structure it shows. I mean, it looks pretty futuristic. It could be God knows what. But that circular or octagonal structure in the middle with all these like dark ridges around it is really interesting. Let's see if we can fit something in there. So once we really make it dark and increase the contrast, it becomes really quite abstract and something very different. So it could be a really cool surface detail that we have down there. I mean, now I got pretty much rid of most of the water, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not like I said in the beginning, I'm not too married to the idea. So if something better is coming along, like this, for example, I'm happy to trade it in and get rid of it. You can also, now with this slider, we can actually get it like half submerged in the water. It's pretty cool as well. So it blends really well with what's below. Making sure it sits properly in perspective, so that's a pretty neat detail there. I thought about maybe adding like some kind of highways in the distance, but I'm not sure I really want to do that. Maybe something more subtle. I want to get rid of all the bright parts, and I kind of just want to have that shadow of where that's between the highway and the ground. That's all I really need as an indication that to introduce some more curvy lines to break up the overall straight feel of everything. So just like a little nod of like hey, there's like a curvy line, something that could indicate a highway or something. That's going to be pretty cool. It's just going to add another layer of stuff, another layer of interest over it. That one I think is too different. It's just too much of an eye catcher. I don't want to necessarily bring that in. Saving, taking a look is always good. Trying to think about next steps. Trying to think what else I can add, what else I need. Some added smoke, never wrong. Some more lights. Some spotlights, anything maybe that I can add to give a bit of variety. Some focal points. or just pure experimentation as well. It's just basically all like, I don't know, post-processing VFX kind of stuff now. Since all the major stuff is kind of in place. I'm still going to do some little details here and there for some objects. But I think the majority of the stuff is kind of there. This gives us like a nice little highlight on the cloud, actually, which helps to sell a bit of the three-dimensionality of the cloud itself. Here, lots of little spotlights. Let's see what we can do with those. They kind of recede very interestingly into the distance. Not very uniformly, but they might just be too distracting. We'll see. It doesn't really help to emphasize our structure here, our structures. But I see it's good to have this kind of collection of like little lights, night scenes that we can easily turn into some kind of spotlight array that we can then use for our nighttime illustrations. So I have quite a few of these spotlights, cities at night, street lights, spotlights, anything. Quite useful. So yeah, I'm trying them out in a variety of scenarios. Not sure anything will really stick, but if nothing works at all, then it's kind of interesting, but can't really seem to make it work. Oh, but now I got really rid of most of it. Yeah, maybe placing it in the vicinity of some of the actual lights that I already have in there is also not a bad idea to give it a bit of a different texture. So again, this helps us bring like an additional layer of complexity to the image. Making sure we squeeze that in there, use the mask. I do not need to put this detail everywhere. I just need to put it in certain spots to get the idea across of what kind of city we're dealing with here. And our brain will automatically fill in the rest. You see, I'm actually erasing a lot of what we had on there. That's pretty cool. I don't know what exactly that is, but I don't know if it's a fire or if it's some kind of art installation. I have no idea. It's pretty cool. So let's see if we can do anything with that. It's pretty bold, or it's pretty strong, so I'm not sure this will be of much use. It's creating maybe too much of a highlight. Making it smaller, making it larger. See what we can do with that. And we get rid of it. Let's see if we can find any other things to integrate. So you see a fair amount is, you kind of have an idea in mind and you kind of want to see how it would look like and spend a few minutes on trying it out. No harm done. That's a pretty massive, light source here. Might be a bit too much. Indeed it is. This one, maybe. The light streaks of the long exposure here from that photograph are quite interesting. Maybe we can bring in those as an indication of like, yeah, traffic. It's pretty cool. Like I kind of did that with in Blender already with the texture itself. So it'd be nice to kind of bring it up again. Since it kind of, well, it disappeared almost in our Paintover here, so. Doesn't really seem to fit, or maybe call too much attention to itself. Let's see. Maybe just a hint here and there. Here, that's the same texture we used before, so it's gonna again help us to add a little bit of detail here and there. The good thing is that one side is kind of like cut off because there's an object in front of the spotlight, so it helps us to create some sharp edges on one side and soft edges on the other. To indicate that maybe the spotlight is half behind one of those skyscrapers. Trying to see if I can add some more atmosphere and create a harder edge here, since it was kind of halfway disappearing. Getting rid of some artifacts. Trying to see if everything is somewhat clear. Sometimes I need to check what's going on with my layers, since I don't really know what's going on with all of them. since I didn't name them, but well, it seems to be okay. Again, the further you get in the progress of your piece, I think the more often you need to step back and take a look and think about what you need to add. Sometimes if you have the luxury of stepping away for a longer time, I don't know if you can sleep over it, it's always really good, because it helps to see the image you're making with fresh eyes, with a different attitude, and it will always help to improve the image in the end, I think. Of course, in production we often do not have the luxury of doing that, so, but it's good to practice that whenever you can. Now I want to actually go in with a paintbrush and get rid of some of the repetition in the windows from the texture that we had in Octane, and also create some areas of rest. Like I said before, I don't want to have equal amount of detail everywhere, so I actually need to go in and create some areas which have less detail. Zooming in here and there to maybe change some things, blend some things a bit better. You can do this for as long as you have time. So by no means you need to have everything done right away, like in this tutorial. But it will be good if you can spend more time on really fleshing out all the little details for all the buildings, because there's really nothing else to it. You need to really create a really finished illustration, you have to just spend the time in repeating this process that I'm showing here over and over and over again, and pushing the quality as much as you can. So now I'm using some kind of like roof details, antennas from a reference pack, and try to give some extra definition to our foreground building here. Since it is so close to the foreground, it also needs to hold up the most, since, like, just thinking about it, like if you have some closer to your eye, you have to, you can make out more details, right? So we need to emulate that here as well. As things recede in the distance, less and less detail will be visible to you. So we need to make sure that we emulate that, and we need to make sure that our foreground building has enough detail, enough interest, that it holds up. So I have a variety of, I don't know, it's like some mobile communications tower and other little details like, I don't know, water tank, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to use them directly for what they are. I don't necessarily want to add lots of little antennas everywhere, but I think the kind of the frequency of detail and the kind of level of the kind of scale of detail is quite helpful for foreground element in order to kind of sell the scale of like what a human would experience, right? So we have the big shapes, we have all the big buildings and everything, we have the secondary shapes, all the shape breakups, the lights, the clouds and everything, and now we need to add some like human-sized details to kind of sell the idea a bit more, and maybe even we should place a human somewhere in there to just like really cement the idea of the scale and how big it is, and well, how small a human really is compared to it. So I'm taking, since it's so dark, the entire image is so dark, I'm actually taking out a lot of the light information out of this antenna and kind of paint over it. So I just have the detail, the silhouette of it, which helps me to kind of make it a bit more abstract and have it make it easier to sell the idea that this is some kind of high-tech whatever roofing detail. Just adding some kind of support, some kind of indication of how this sits in perspective, because it's really not in perspective, the photo that was taken. So I'm just adding like a little bit of a thing to make it believable that, okay, you can actually buy the idea that this is in the perspective of the image. See if we can do anything with that. Since it was kind of taken from the perspective from somebody standing below and shooting up, it's kind of working against us, so we can't really use it as a tower in the usual sense, but we can actually flip it. So now that kind of looks like some kind of like floating platform or something that hangs off the underside of some kind of cantilever part of a building, which is pretty cool. Just trying to think where it could hang best. It's kind of nice actually there in the foreground on the right, but I feel like it obscures too much of the city below, even though it helps kind of to push the depth of it. So, but yeah, I mean, you guys can choose to maybe have a bit more of a bolder composition by putting that really in front and center. I choose to kind of like put it on the left side, kind of as a additional detail more in the shadows. But it's cool either way. There's no wrong or right in this case. It's a pretty cool detail. I would definitely want to maybe use it somewhere else, so I'll make a copy of it. So in the end, this has become some kind of very long horizontal antenna roofing detail. Maybe we can add some kind of massive antenna somewhere in the background, just to break up the rectangular shapes of the buildings a little bit. Maybe as a detail from that one, but that kind of looks weird. So yeah, maybe I can add it somewhere in the background. It's kind of subtly half obscured by the clouds, maybe. Kind of remembering how maybe the Tokyo Tower kind of stands out in the middle of all the skyscrapers and gives like a kind of like a landmark quality to it, because the shape is so different. It's a pretty cool shape, but I'm not sure how I can fit that in. Let's bring that little thing in here. I think that's going to be the last detail to bring in, and then I think we're pretty much done with this lesson. Like I said before, it's going to be, if you want to take this image further, if you want to add more detail, it's just spending a lot more time on finding the right references, going in, painting little details here and there, refining areas that need more of a touch-up. And yeah, doing it again and again and again and again, as long as you have time for, in however long your client gives you time, or how much time you give yourself. So I hope you enjoyed this, and can't wait to see what you come up with.